Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon for our third webinar in our Phenomena in Practice series. Today, our topic is about tracking student progress toward NGSS proficiency. And thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. Julie and I are going to go ahead and return the favor and introduce ourselves now. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years in Minnesota prior to coming to work here at Inner Orbit. During that time, I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, honors chem, so lots of opportunities to reach a lot of different kids in a lot of different ways. I considered myself an NGSS pioneer and advocate. I also got to be a PLC lead. And now I have the joy of partnering with districts to help them implement Inner Orbit. And if you were here at the beginning, you know that my guilty pleasure TV show right now is Love is Blind UK. There's like one for every country. There's so many. It's so good. And Julia will introduce herself now.
Well, I think actually our colleague Daniel is going to introduce himself first. So I'm going to pass it over to him.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I snuck in there. My name is Daniel Jackson. I was previously a curriculum director, high school biology teacher, middle school science teacher, and within education for 11 years. I taught at an international school in Colombia during that time, and I was also a Fulbright TGC scholar for Morocco. I currently partner with school leaders and teachers new to Inner Orbit, and I am watching Alice in Borderland. They're in the third season right now. Super interesting show, so if you're looking for something new, go ahead and check it out. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Julia.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And my name is Julia Mota. I was a teacher and tutor for elementary students in the Dominican Republic, and I've been supporting teachers and districts with their NGSS implementation for the past 4 years. I've been able to partner and provide guidance to schools and districts implementing assessment in their NGSS instruction. And every fall, that's my fun fact, I rewatch Gilmore Girls. I know that it's a controversial show and people are like, I don't know if I love it. But honestly, I'm like, that is life. Sometimes it's not what you expect. So I really love it. And it's really a cozy show for me to watch. And today, we're actually going to talk about tracking student progress toward NGSS proficiency. When you leave here, we expect that you will learn how to formatively assess all 3 dimensions of the NGSS through a scaffolded questioning strategy and using novel phenomena. We're going to be here for about 40 minutes, and the agenda for today is that we're going to go over what is in orbit, as we always do. We're going to talk a little bit about sense making, just a little recap, the formative assessments this time. We're going to go over some NGSS terminology and scaffolding questioning. Then we're going to talk about, and Emily's going to show us some formative assessment examples, some formative data analysis, and then we're going to wrap up. Isn't that phenomenal? I think it really is. And we're going to talk about phenomena a lot today. So let's get into this. And first, we always talk about what is Inner Orbit first. So Inner Orbit is an NGSS assessment platform with reports, practice, and assessments for science educators from grades 3 through high school. And we provide high integrity 3D assessments that give you meaningful data to guide instruction. We start with phenomena, then we go into assessments, and from there, our platform delivers thoughtfully designed 3-dimensional assessments that let students demonstrate what they know and how they think. And then these reports that surface the 3-dimensional learning data are aligned to state tests, and they help you make informed decisions and track NGSS proficiency. One of the things that really sets Inner Orbit apart is how we make the NGSS accessible for both you and your students. So we know that navigating the 3 dimensions of the standard can be overwhelming. So we focus on supporting innovative sense making every sense of the way. So with our scaffolded questions, we have 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, and 3-dimensional. We'll talk a little bit more about that. If you're designing a quick check-in, a performance task, or gathering district-wide data, you can build the assessment that fits your goals. And we help educators turn assessment data into action. We also provide guidance, supporting resources, and professional development to help you and your team reach your NGSS goals. And as leaders in the NGSS assessment world, we go beyond just the platform. We're constantly sharing best practices through free webinars like this one, personalized support, and PD that helps you build a strong foundation in 3D assessment. And if you're interested in learning more about Inner Orbit, we're going to drop a link in the chat. So feel free to fill out that form and we'll reach out with more information. Now, let's actually talk a little bit and let's get into the meat of our webinar, a little bit about sense making with formative assessments. So first of all, just recapping what sense making is. Sense making occurs when students connect what they already know, their prior knowledge, their skills and experiences, to grapple with something new. And that something new is usually a phenomena or a problem that they've never seen before, which introduces a level of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is key because it pushes students to ask questions, test ideas, and build meaning. And to qualify as true sense making, there are three key ingredients or criteria that we want to see. First, is the phenomenon novel? So are we presenting our students with something authentic and unfamiliar? Then the integration of all three dimensions, the DCI, the SEP, and the cross-cutting concept. And finally, a real struggle with uncertainty, something that students don't necessarily know the answer immediately for, and that's okay, because that's where learning lives. Now, many times students only experience one phenomena in a unit, as we kind of talked in our past webinar. As we see here, we have an anchoring phenomena, and this is taken from an Open Science unit. It can look like students are learning science in that scenario, but many times they're just memorizing that one phenomenon. So for students to really practice applying what they're learning to the world around them, we must give them multiple opportunities to make sense of novel phenomena. Today, we're diving into the formative assessment aspect of it. Last webinar, we went into our sense-making practice activities, and then towards the end of our series, we're going to go over summative assessments next week. But before we dive deeper into three-dimensional assessments and formative assessments, we're going to take a moment to talk about NGSS terminology, or specifically the performance expectations or PEs. And unlike traditional standards that often focus on isolated facts or skill, a PE tells us what students should actually be able to demonstrate their understanding. And every performance expectation integrates three different dimensions: the DCIs, that are the disciplinary core ideas or what students know, the SEPs, that are the science and engineering practices or what students do, and then the cross-cutting concepts, which are the big ideas that help students connect learning across different domains. And in the example right here on the slide, we can see how all of these three dimensions come together into one performance-based outcome. So students aren't just recalling facts, they're making sense of phenomena and showing their thinking in action. And now that we know what a performance expectation is, we're going to talk about how to assess it. So to truly meet a performance expectation, students need to answer questions that integrate all three dimensions, right? The DCI, the SEP, and the cross-cutting concept. We call these three-dimensional questions because they require students not just to know science, but to do science and think like scientists. And the act of putting them all together with a phenomena or a problem is called sense making. Now, getting students to that point takes intentional scaffolding, and that's where one-dimensional and two-dimensional questions come from. So a one-dimensional question is focusing just on one dimension, like the content knowledge, just the DCI. A two-dimensional question is bringing two dimensions, maybe the content and the practices, or the content and the cross-cutting concepts. And finally, a three-dimensional question integrates all three, requiring students to apply their knowledge, use scientific reasoning, and connect ideas across different concepts. So using this progression, one-dimensional to two-dimensional to three-dimensional, not only supports students in building deeper understanding, but it also gives us, educators, a clear pathway to develop sense-making skills over time. And now that we've gone over some of the basics as we did in our other webinars, let's actually bring this into formative assessments. And these are one of the most powerful tools that we have for guiding instruction in real time. So the purpose of this is to check for proficiency during instruction, not necessarily after. And these are tools that will help you gather meaningful in-the-moment data to make quick instructional decisions, like maybe we need some reteaching, or we move on, or we shift our approach. Assessments that are formative are designed with an orbit, with one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional scaffolding to pinpoint specific support exactly where students are in their learning. So you might identify a gap in content knowledge, or maybe students are struggling with a specific practice, or maybe they need support with integrating all three dimensions. And that's kind of what we want to uncover here. Because the goal at the end of the day is not just to give a grade, it is to understand how students are progressing towards proficiency at this point, and to provide them with the support that they need along the way. And on the right side of the slide, you can see how these scaffolded question types build up. The one-dimensional questions may ask about core knowledge only, two-dimensional combine DCI and cross-cutting concept, or DCI and science and engineering practice, and full three-dimensional tasks ask students to apply the three-dimension to make sense of that phenomenon. Now, on our last webinar, if you remember, we focused on the action piece of this cycle right here. What happens after you've gathered student data? Today, we're taking a step back to look at the two steps that come before that. So assess and analyze, or maybe not before, because at the end of the day, it's a cycle and we need to keep repeating this. And this is part of our larger vision here at InnoOrbit, that is at the end of the day, supporting a continuous and actionable cycle of NGSS aligned instruction and assessment. And this is very powerful when it's paired with formative assessments, because when we're able to quickly assess and analyze during instruction, we can make those real-time shifts that meet students' need before the summative data even enters the picture. So as we're going to explore formative assessment today, we're going to look closely at how assessing and analyzing student sense-making, especially with novel phenomena, can give us the insight that we need to take right actions to support our students. Now, I'm going to pass it on to Emily, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth about what formative assessments are and how they're structured.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you so much for hanging out with us while we review some of the NGSS terminology and formative assessments. It's always nice just to make sure we're all on that same page with the alphabet soup that is the NGSS. So as we're talking through formative assessments today, and specifically using formative assessments to track NGSS proficiency, I wanted to pull an actual example of a formative assessment that we have built and used on InnoOrbit, and the type of data that is then gathered from that assessment that you can then use to make those instructional shifts like Julia mentioned. So the example that I wanted to share with you all today comes from a unit within the Open SciEd curriculum. This will be a 7th grade example, and the unit is matter cycling and photosynthesis. So if you are familiar with Open SciEd, this is unit 7. Has 4 different performance expectations that are covered within it. This unit has an anchoring phenomena about maple syrup. So the idea with this is, where does our food come from? How does the maple syrup get in the tree? What does the maple syrup do once it's in our bodies? And how do all of these different parts of this ecosystem interact and work with each other? So with this, the idea with a formative assessment is you want to do it during instruction. So within this Open SciEd unit, lessons 4 through 7, lessons 4, 5, are all focused around MS Ellis 1-6. MS Ellis 1-6 is essentially about photosynthesis, if that kind of helps. So after completing these 4 lessons, what may be helpful then is to then give a formative assessment to see how students are doing on this particular standard that was covered in this particular series of lessons. What you can then do is you can go on InnoOrbit, and we actually are aligned to a handful of different NGSS aligned curriculum. Now, I do want to say, if you are using a curriculum that is not one of these, you can still navigate the InnoOrbit site and you can still find assessments that will align to your instruction, because at the end of the day, our true north at InnoOrbit is the NGSS. So if you are teaching MS Ellis 1-6, regardless if it's Amplify, Open SciEd, or some homebrew unit that you've made on your own, you could still utilize this formative assessment for that. But what you could do if you are using Open SciEd is you could go ahead and click Open SciEd, click that unit that you're currently working in, which is at 7.4. And then from there, you can actually look at our pre-built formative assessments. So this is to save you some time. And when you click into there, you're going to see pre-built formative assessments for each of the standards that are taught in this unit. So if I'm a teacher and I just finished lesson 7, and I just spent a few days now teaching MS Ellis 1-6, I'm going to want to grab the MS Ellis 1-6 scaffolded formative assessment. So what does this actually look like? So this pre-built assessment on MS Ellis 1-6 is still going to be centered around a novel phenomenon, because as this entire webinar series has been talking about, we need to give students opportunities to interact with novel phenomena so they have opportunities to practice sense making, because sense making needs to be around something novel that they haven't seen before, and there needs to be some authentic uncertainty in there. So something they need to discover or figure out, like, why do forests go nuts for acorns? I don't know. Let's find out. So when you're looking at this formative assessment, it's going to be made up of 5 questions. The first 2 are going to be one-dimensional DCI only questions. And the goal with this, starting out this assessment with these one-dimensional DCI only questions, is for you as the educator to ask yourself, do my students understand the core content of this standard? Since every other question is going to build off of the DCI and the core content, we want to make sure they got the gist of photosynthesis down. So these questions can help you discover if students are good to go with that. Then from there, we can go ahead and ask our students two-dimensional questions. And these two-dimensional questions are really nice because it's giving students an opportunity to practice one other dimension at a time with the DCI. So how are they doing with this idea of the flow and cycle of energy? And then separately, how are they doing on constructing explanations and designing solutions? Because those are two different skills. So we're giving students a chance to answer questions about those. And then the last question we offer is that three-dimensional sense-making question. This is the goal. We want our students to be able to synthesize all three dimensions with a novel phenomena, with that authentic uncertainty. But we don't necessarily want to throw them in the deep end right away, which is why we offer these scaffolded questions initially to see how they're doing. Which, talking about seeing how they're doing, if this is something that you are initially curious about. So if you're looking at this and you're like, I kind of want to see what inner orbit has got, or I want to see if there's some like novel phenomena that I could use, Julia is going to go ahead and drop that link one more time in the chat. And this link is an interest form, letting our team know that you're interested in potentially learning more about inner orbit and trying it. So our pilot program is free, so that you're not committing to anything. You're not like signing your life away or anything like that. This is just an opportunity for you to check out the site and let us know that you might want to learn more, and then we can be there to answer questions along the way. So feel free to fill that out if that's something you're interested in. What I'm really excited to show you all now is the data that Inner Orbit produces as a result of these formative assessments, because our entire cycle is that assess, analyze, action. So after you assess, you need to be able to then analyze some data to determine what your next action steps will be. And the data we get out of Inner Orbit is so specific. And so I'm just going to show you. So when we're getting into the analyzing data, the first report I want to show you, because we have multiple reports, the first report I want to show you is what we call our assignments report. And this is where you can go and look and see how your students did on each individual question. So if you recall, when we go back to this formative assessment here, the first two questions were DCI only content questions. So when I'm looking at my data over here, I'm seeing how my students did on those first two questions. It looks like they struggled a little bit more with the first question than the second question. That first question was also a matching question, where the second question was multiple choice. So in that case, students had to toggle two different words and put them in the right space, which would maybe be more difficult for them. Then for the two-dimensional CCC question, they did awesome. So this might be telling me that my students are actually doing a pretty good job of grasping this idea of energy and matter flowing throughout a system. Then when I'm looking at my two-dimensional SEP question with constructing explanations and designing solutions, it looks like they're doing pretty on par with how they performed on the DCI question to now this two-dimensional question. So this is maybe letting me know that my students aren't struggling with applying the SCP to the content, which is great. And then I look at the three-dimensional question, and I see that there is, about a 20% decrease in performance with the 3D question, which is letting me know as an educator that my students might be having a hard time bringing all three dimensions together and parsing everything into one question. With that specific level of data, now I know exactly how to go back and help support my students, rather than saying like, do I need to review photosynthesis? Sometimes when you get those initial reports back, it can be hard to know exactly where to pinpoint. And this can give you a little bit more direction on what those action steps should be. Now, let's say you're curious to see a little bit more data. Then you can go to our dimensions report. Our dimensions report can show you aggregate data for how students have been doing on the three dimensions over time. So for example, this assignments report is just looking at how students did on this one question or on this one formative assessment. But on my dimensions report, I can come over and see every single time I ask my students about MSLS 1.6, how are they doing? So like on this particular assessment, I know how they're doing, but MSLS 1.6 could have been cyclical and it could have come up in other units or in other ways. So overall, how are we doing on this? I can also do that with the SCP. So especially the SCPs and the CCCs, those continue to come up in multiple grade levels and multiple content areas. So overall, how are my students doing on this SCP? Not just in this one snapshot, but overall. And then I can do the same thing with the cross-cutting concept. So what's interesting is I could compare these results here to my assignments report and see, is what happened within my assignments report like a unique instance? Is this on track with how they've been doing overall when they see these things in other contexts? And you can also zoom out and see this information, not just for your students, but for your entire school site as well. You can also see this from a district level as well. So if you're in a larger district with multiple school sites, you can look and see how your individual school sites are doing on the DCIs, the SEP, and the cross-cutting concepts, which can be really helpful when you're trying to identify patterns and trends within your district. So if you're looking and you want to provide your teachers or your educators with professional development, the district report might be a nice place to sit here and say, okay, where do my schools need more support? Or does a particular school site need more support? Or should I go talk to school 5 because they're killing it and that teacher went to that one conference and found that cool tool and is using it, and now you have an opportunity to share out all the wins that they're having. So with this level of detailed data on each dimension, from a really zoomed out level on the district report to a really zoomed in level on the assignments report, you can pinpoint and make those instructional shifts either within your classroom or even on a district-wide level if necessary. So what we've done is we've now talked about formative assessments and how novel phenomena can play into that. And I do want to remind ourselves about this entire assessment cycle. So after you analyze, you need to then take some action if you've identified some specific target opportunities that you want to support your students with. And the last webinar we did last week actually provides some different classroom activities that you could then use to help support your students based on what you identified within your data. For example, let's say there's a particular SEP you want to support your students with. Well, one of our activities is SEP practice problems. So then from there, you can assign your students some SEP practice problems, work on them together as a class to give them that additional support with the SCP if that's something that you identified. You can find this webinar on our YouTube channel. We'll show you a link to our YouTube channel here at the end of the webinar. You can also reach out to us at any point as well if you're curious to learn more about what those look like. And because it is a cycle, after you take that necessary action, the unit does continue on at some point. So let's say if you want to go back into your brain, we're in Open SciEd, 7th grade, 7.4, matter and cycling. And let's say we've gotten a little bit farther down the unit. And now we've completed lessons 13, 14, and 15, which pretty much have a focus on MSLS 2, 3. I can go ahead, I can go back to Inner Orbit, go back and click Open SciEd, click 7.4, click formative, and now this time I can click the MSLS 2-3 formative assessment rather than the MSLS 1-6. And now I can go through that same process again. Give my students that 5-question assessment on 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, and 3-dimensional questions, pinpoint where they may need support, and then offer it to them as needed. And with that, we're just getting to the half an hour mark. Look at us. Julia will go ahead and recap what we talked about here today and give you some next steps in case you're interested.
All right, so we've done so much in just under 30 minutes, which is amazing. But this time we were able to stick to our calendar and to stick to our 30-minute mark. So today we learned how to formatively assess all 3 dimensions through a scaffolded questioning strategy using novel phenomena. And we learned that in order to be proficient with a performance expectation, students need to answer questions and get involved in tasks that utilize the DCI, the SCP, and cross-cutting concepts all together. But that is not meaningful unless they're using a novel phenomena. We focused on the assess and analyze part of the cycle today, and we went through some on how to scaffold questions. And if you're trying to look at this, obviously on Inner Orbit, we have loads of these questions, thousands of these questions that you can use in your instruction. So fill out the form that we dropped before if you're wanting to learn more about that. And we're actually hosting our last webinar in these series is going to be about summative assessment. And my colleague Daniel is going to drop the link in the chat if you're interested in joining us one more time for our last webinar. Please sign up and we'll see you there. Now, next steps, we're going to drop again the form in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more about Inner Orbit, you can fill that out. Trust me, there's no type of commitment with that. It's honestly just going to give you access for a full month in case you're kind of interested in seeing how easy it can make your life to have novel phenomena in your, and I know somebody in the chat said, I've been building my novel phenomena. Jocelyn, that is amazing. Props to you. But if you don't want to do that, Inner Orbit has thousands of phenomena and also thousands of questions that you can use for your instruction. If you like this content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at In Orbit NGSS. We always upload our webinars there, and we have a lot of webinars that we've done in the past. So if you're interested in learning more about NGSS foundations, the 3 dimensions, the K-12 progressions, all of those things are already in there, and we have different webinars about different things. And you can also email us, inquiries@inorbit.com if you have any questions or if you have any feedback for us. Thank you so much, everyone, for your continued participation and your continued presence in our webinars. We're really grateful for you to be here, and we really enjoy doing these webinars and seeing your questions and participation in the chat. So we hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll hang out for questions for a little bit more.